First confirmed road closure came in before anybody in the room was willing to say the word impact. That matters. People hear asteroid and expect somebody to start talking about space right away. But the first real problem was a dispatcher in Merced County saying traffic had stopped dead on Interstate 5, southbound and northbound, with people leaving their cars in the lanes because the sky had gone red-brown over the hills west of Los Banos. Then a county fire captain cut across the line and said he had multiple vegetation fires, broken gas lines near scattered ranch properties, 2 transmission towers down, and no clean view toward the source because the smoke column was building too fast. That was the first thing I could use. Not a theory, not a press line, a road blocked, a fire moving, and people already outside their vehicles where they should not have been. I was inside the State Emergency Media Center in Sacramento, seated at a folding workstation with a headset pressed against one ear and 3 screens full of maps that kept refreshing out of order. Nobody had the full picture. The official public statement said a small celestial object had entered over the Pacific and fragmented over inland California, with ground damage still being assessed. That was careful language. The private traffic channels were not careful. California Highway Patrol units were calling out windshield damage near Gilroy, transformer fires around Hollister, secondary crashes on Highway 152, and a dust wave crossing farm roads near Dos Palos. A supervisor from Fresno County kept asking whether the Panoche Valley was still reachable. Nobody answered him for almost 4 minutes. The warning came late. That part has to be understood cleanly. This was not one of those big tracked objects with a neat press briefing and a week of cable news graphics. The early word from the National Aeronautics and Space Administration liaison was that it had been picked up as a small inbound object over the Pacific, low warning time, high entry speed, and bad geometry for civilian detection. Military sensors saw more than they were ready to say. Weather satellites caught the flash, seismic stations caught the hit. Regular people caught the sound. From Sacramento down through the San Joaquin Valley, people described a pressure slap against windows and garage doors. In Los Banos, some doors came off old hinges. In Gastine, storefront glass cracked. In Santanella, a motel clerk reported ceiling tiles down and guests bleeding from broken glass. By 4:30 in the afternoon, we were already behind. That is how disaster really works in California. The public thinks response begins after the announcement. Inside the room, response begins when the phones all start ringing and the announcement has not been written yet. County emergency managers were asking for shelter locations. Hospitals were asking where to send overflow patients. Fire command wanted aircraft, then pulled back because visibility above the hills had gone bad and nobody wanted rotor crews flying blind through ash and grit. The California Governor's Office of Emergency Services had field coordinators calling every operational area from San Benito to Fresno, trying to figure out which requests were real and which were duplicate panic from the same incident reported 10 different ways. I had covered floods, heat emergencies, winter storms, wildfire evacuations, hospital surge, and water shortages. I knew the state was tough, but I also knew it was not elastic. Roads do not stretch because people are scared. Hospitals do not create intensive care beds because a governor says emergency. Fire engines cannot be in Santa Cruz, Los Banos, and Fresno County at the same time. Water systems do not stay clean when ash, broken mains, and power loss hit together. California works because a huge number of fragile systems keep moving every day without much spare room. Knock one of those systems hard enough and every other one starts making ugly noises. The impact zone was first described as west of Interstate 5 and southwest of Los Banos, somewhere in the rough dry country between the San Luis Reservoir area, the Panoche Hills, and scattered ranch roads that most Californians never think about unless they are cutting across the state or watching the hills turn brown in summer. That location mattered right away. Interstate 5 is not just a road, it is one of the main north-south arteries for people, food, fuel, emergency traffic, and freight. Highway 152 through Pacheco Pass is one of the key east-west crossings between the Central Valley and the coast. The California Aqueduct and the Delta Mendota Canal run through that broader region. Transmission lines cross it. Gas infrastructure crosses it. You hit that region hard and the problem is not local for long. The first 12 hours still belong to normal disaster work. Evacuation zones were drawn fast, then redrawn because the maps did not match field conditions. In a clean drill, you draw a circle around a hazard and move people out. In real life, smoke goes where the wind takes it. Roads fail where the pavement was already stressed. And people move toward family instead of toward the shelter printed on a county website. Winds were not extreme at first, which helped. Then the heat rising from multiple fires began making its own local mess. Crews near the western edge of Fresno County reported wind shifts across grass and brush that had been dry enough to burn fast. Aircraft could not safely commit until visibility and turbulence were checked. That delay cost ground crews time they did not have. Public health started its own count before the fire map settled. Eye irritation, breathing trouble, burns from hot debris, cuts from broken glass, cardiac events, panic crashes, asthma attacks, dehydration, smoke exposure. That was the list. Nothing strange yet. Just California getting hit in every known weak spot at once. Hospitals in Merced, Modesto, Fresno, Madera, Salinas, and the Bay Area began checking bed status. Ambulance coordinators tried to keep trauma patients from all flowing to the same facilities. Some hospitals had backup power, but backup power is not a magic switch. It needs fuel, maintenance, cooling, staff, and a clear plan for what to power first. Emergency departments were already busy before the sky changed. At 5:12, the first water warning crossed my desk. It came from a regional water operator who sounded calm in the way people sound when he is trying not to lose his temper. Turbidity was rising in open conveyance near the Western Valley. Ash was settling on exposed water surfaces. Some pumping stations had lost utility power and were on backup. Several smaller systems were asking whether to issue boil water notices, but boiling water does not fix chemical contamination. That distinction matters. When a line breaks, pressure drops, and dirty water can enter the system. When ash and unknown dust settle into reservoirs, canals, and treatment intakes, the question becomes what is in the ash. Fire residue is bad enough. Impact dust adds a second problem. Nobody at a local plant can identify on the fly. At 5:26, somebody in the back of the room said the ports were asking for a logistics call. That made a few people turn around because the ports were nowhere near the crater. Then the reason came through. Trucking companies wanted to know whether Interstate 5 would reopen before night, whether Highway 99 could take diverted loads, whether fuel deliveries from the Bay Area and Southern California terminals should be held, and whether refrigerated produce shipments from the Central Valley had priority over general freight. That is when the room got quieter. A strike in the hills west of the valley was already touching the Port of Oakland, the Port of Los Angeles, the Port of Long Beach, rail schedules, warehouse slots, and grocery distribution outside California. The first public briefing was too clean. I do not mean dishonest. I mean built from old language because old language was all they had. They told people to avoid the area, follow county evacuation orders, check air quality, conserve phone batteries, keep roads clear for emergency crews, and avoid spreading unverified reports. That was all correct. It was also not enough. People on the ground were seeing orange light through smoke, broken windows, dead power, stalled cars, and a column rising from the hills. Parents wanted to know whether schools were safe. Farmers wanted to know whether wells were contaminated. Truck drivers wanted routes. Hospitals wanted transfer agreements confirmed. Fire crews wanted wind and aircraft windows. Local sheriffs wanted a perimeter they could actually staff. My job was to take the public information and strip it down to what a regular person could use without making it sound smaller than it was. So I said the part nobody wanted in the first statement. If you are east of the smoke plume, close windows, shut outside air intake if you know how, do not run swamp coolers pulling outside air, and do not assume the dust on your car is ordinary dirt. If you are near a canal, reservoir, irrigation ditch, or stock tank in the affected counties, keep animals away until local authorities test it. If you are trying to leave, do not drive toward Interstate 5 unless your county says that corridor is open. If you are safe where you are, staying put may be better than joining a jam that blocks fire engines and ambulances. A woman from a school district near Madera called one of the public lines and said buses were late because parents had shown up all at once. That happens in every emergency. The school wants to shelter students. Parents want children in the car with them. Both positions make sense to the person holding each one. The problem is roads. A 2-lane frontage road near a school can become useless in 6 minutes if every parent arrives, parks badly, and demands answers from a staff member who has no better information than anyone else. We started telling schools outside immediate evacuation zones to hold students indoors, use internal air if possible, and stop releasing students into dangerous traffic unless parents had a clear route home. Around 6 in the evening, the smoke column bent east and the Central Valley started taking the load. Air monitors began dropping out near the worst areas, which was not comforting. A monitor can fail because power fails, communications fail, the sensor is damaged, or the air is outside the device's useful range. None of those are good. The San Joaquin Valley already has air quality problems on normal bad days because geography traps pollution. Add wildfires, impact dust, broken power systems, traffic jams, and people running generators in the wrong places, and you get a public health event that does not need anything supernatural to become deadly. People with asthma, heart disease, chronic lung issues, infants, older adults, and outdoor workers became priority concerns before sunset. My daughter was on a paramedic crew that had been sent toward the Los Banos side before the evacuation lines hardened. I am saying that once, and I am not turning this into a family story. She is 30 years old, trained, sharp, and stubborn in a way that makes me proud when I am not scared of it. I did not call her while the channels were busy. I knew better. A private call from me would not help her, and it would take attention from somebody who needed the line. I watched the incident map refresh and kept doing my job because that was the only useful thing I could do for her and for anyone else on those roads. At 6:22, the first report of vehicles stalling near the outer perimeter came in. The wording was weak at first. Multiple vehicle failures, possible dust ingestion, possible electromagnetic interference, drivers reporting dashboard resets. That could mean almost anything. Heavy ash can clog filters, heat can stress engines. Panic traffic can cause people to overheat cars by crawling in low gear with air conditioning blasting. Newer vehicles have electronics that do not enjoy power surges, impact debris, or overheated engine bays. Nobody serious jumped to strange conclusions from that first report. We logged it, asked for locations, and told field officers to separate mechanical failures from crashes, fuel problems, and blocked air intakes. By 7, Evacuation became a math problem nobody wanted to say out loud. The western edge of Merced County could not simply empty into Highway 99. Without overloading streets through Los Banos, Merced, Atwater, and smaller communities already dealing with smoke. Pacheco Pass had closures and crashes, Interstate 5 had damage, stalled vehicles, fire crews, and law enforcement trying to keep people from driving toward the impact area for photos. Highway 33 was no answer. Rural roads were narrow, poorly lit in places, and already full of ranch trucks, trailers, emergency vehicles, and lost drivers following navigation apps that did not know the roads were gone. Navigation apps are trouble in disasters. They keep offering clever routes long after the clever route has become a locked gate, a washout, or a fire line. The governor spoke at 7:30. The statement was sober and better than the first one. State emergency response activated. Mutual aid moving. National Guard units preparing transportation and security support. Federal partners notified. Stay off roads unless ordered to evacuate. Avoid the impact area. Do not collect fragments. Report debris, but do not touch it. That last line made my head come up. Do not collect fragments. They put it low in the statement, almost buried under shelter language, but it had been cleared by somebody who was already worried about the material on the ground. At that point, the public reason was simple. Hot debris, sharp debris, possible chemical contamination. That was believable. It was also probably incomplete. The first night did not fall clean. Fires painted the western horizon from several counties. Power outages created dark patches across towns, and smoke made sunset useless. Fire behavior analysts were trying to model where separate burns could merge if wind moved out of the west. Firefighters were defending roads and structures instead of chasing every flame. That is not failure, it is triage. In dry grass and brush country, a fire can outrun crews, especially when access roads are damaged and aircraft are delayed. If you have limited crews, you protect life. Keep escape routes open, stop fire from crossing key roads where possible, and accept that some ground will burn. At 8:10, a county health officer asked whether the shelters could keep outside air from being pulled straight into gymnasiums. That question sounds small until you picture the shelter. High school gym with hundreds of people, frightened children, older adults with oxygen tanks, pets and carriers if the shelter allows them, volunteers wearing masks, restrooms under strain, and heating or cooling systems designed for normal school use, not a contaminated air emergency. You cannot just say shelter indoors and be done. Indoor air has to be managed. Doors open every minute, filtered claff run out of masks. People who leave to smoke or check on their cars bring dust back in. A shelter can protect people and still become a medical problem by midnight. At 8:44, we got our first clear crater estimate from a state liaison who warned us not to repeat it yet. The main impact appeared to be in remote terrain west of the valley floor, not inside a large city, which was the only reason casualty numbers were not already catastrophic. The blast zone still clipped ranch properties, roads, power infrastructure, and dry vegetation. Ground teams could not reach the center. Aircraft imagery was limited by smoke and heat shimmer. Satellite imagery showed a disturbed area, thermal anomalies, and fires spreading outward from several points. The phrase thermal anomalies bothered me. Fire is fire. Hot ground near a crater is expected. But the way the liaison said it told me the readings were not behaving the way the analysts expected. By 9, rumors were getting people hurt. One livestream claimed Fresno was being evacuated. It was false. Another claimed the San Luis Reservoir Dam had failed. False at that hour, and deeply dangerous because panic traffic started moving before officials could squash it. Another said poisonous gas was pouring through the valley. Unverified and too broad to be useful. Then one rumor said the object was a foreign weapon. That one spread fast because it gave people a villain. Disasters without a villain make people angry in a different way. They start inventing one. My advice stayed boring on purpose. Stay inside if you are not under an evacuation order. Keep phones charged. Use text messages instead of calls. Fill clean containers with water if your local system says pressure is at risk. Do not drive towards smoke. Do not touch debris. The daughter call came at 9:18. It lasted less than 30 seconds. She said she was east of Los Banos, breathing through a mask, moving patients from a roadside crash to a staging area and not going closer. Her voice was tight, not panicked, tight. She asked if I knew whether Highway 152 was open westbound. I told her no, not for civilian use. And probably not for medical unless a corridor commander cleared it. She said okay. Tell people to quit stopping on shoulders to film the plume because crews were losing access. Then she hung up. That was the whole call. No goodbye. No drama, just a working paramedic mad at people turning a disaster into footage. The state shifted from response into containment language, though nobody used that word publicly yet. A no-entry zone expanded. Hazmat teams were ordered to stage farther out than usual. Field sampling was delayed because the center remained too hot and unstable. Law enforcement began turning away independent contractors, journalists, streamers, off-duty responders without assignment, and locals trying to reach property inside the hard closure. That made people furious. I understood it. If your ranch is inside the line, you want to know whether your animals are alive. If your spouse is unaccounted for, a roadblock feels cruel. But an unmanaged disaster zone becomes a second disaster. California has learned that the hard way through fires, floods, and mudslides. The strange part started for me at 10:27 with a compass. A sheriff's deputy near a roadblock reported his vehicle navigation was Unreliable, and his handheld compass was off from landmarks he knew. That could be a bad compass, a stressed deputy, magnetic material in the ground, a nearby vehicle, a radio, or simple confusion in smoke. Then another report came from a utility crew using survey equipment near a damaged line. Their instruments gave inconsistent readings. Then a drone operated by a county team lost orientation and drifted hard toward the closure before crashing. Again, one drone crash means nothing. Drones fail all the time in smoke, heat, wind, and bad signal conditions. 3 different instrument problems in the same rough area made people stop dismissing it. At 11, the hospitals began using language that tells you the day has gone bad: diversion, surge transfer limits, oxygen resupply, staff callback, ambulance wall time. Those words mean patients are not moving through the system fast enough. Emergency departments were taking crash injuries, smoke cases, burns, heat cases, panic injuries, and regular medical emergencies that did not politely pause for an asteroid. Dialysis patients still needed care. Pregnant women still went into labor. Nursing homes still needed power and transport plans. A disaster response that focuses only on the most dramatic victims misses the people who die because the normal system around them stops working. Just before midnight, the state water call got tense. Treatment plants downstream and east of the impact influence area wanted clearer guidance. Agricultural districts wanted to know whether to shut diversions. Ranchers wanted stock water advice. Southern California agencies were asking whether the state water project facilities and deliveries could be affected if contamination reached certain canals or if power interruptions and spread. The California water system is not one pipe. It is reservoirs, canals, pumps, aqueducts, local groundwater, treatment plants, contracts, lawsuits, politics, and weather. Still, imported water is real, and millions depend on it. The Central Valley also feeds the country. If irrigation districts lose confidence in water quality during heat and fire season, the damage does not stop at the county line. The first midnight briefing used the phrase, "no indication of ongoing celestial threat." That was true and almost useless. People were not afraid of a second rock at that moment. They were afraid of the one already in the ground. The casualty numbers were still low compared with the scale of the event because the main strike missed dense cities. That became the official comfort line. I hated it because it invited people to underestimate what was happening. A direct hit on remote infrastructure can injure the whole state. A closed highway can spoil food. A contaminated canal can change planting decisions. A smoke emergency can fill hospitals. A damaged transmission corridor can push blackouts into places that never saw the flash. By 1 a.m, ash was falling in thin layers across parts of the valley. People sent pictures of red-gray powder on pickup hoods, window screens, patio tables, lettuce fields, almond orchards, solar panels, irrigation equipment, and school roofs. The public asked whether to wash it off. That answer had to be careful. Do not use blowers. Do not sweep dry dust into the air. Wear a proper mask if you have one. Keep kids away from it. Do not rinse large amounts into storm drains if local officials tell you not to. For solar panels, do not climb roofs in the dark during an emergency. For farms, wait for agricultural extension and county guidance. It was unsatisfying advice, but fast, confident advice can be dangerous when nobody knows the material. At 2:12, a fire behavior analyst told the operations group that if the wind turned north after sunrise, 2 major fire fingers could make a run toward more populated edges of the valley and force a new evacuation band. He did not raise his voice. That made it worse. Quiet experts scare me more than loud officials. Loud officials may be performing. Quiet experts are usually doing math. The fire did not need high winds to hurt us. It needed enough slope, enough dry fuel, enough heat, and enough blocked access. Crews were already stretched. Aircraft crews needed daylight and visibility. Water drops do not solve a fire by themselves. Ground crews still have to hold line, protect structures, and keep people from driving into places where fire engines need to move. At 3 a.m, federal language entered the room in full. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, Department of Energy, Department of Transportation, Environmental Protection Agency, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, United States Geological Survey, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and Department of Defense were all attached in some form. That list sounds powerful until you watch it operate during the first hours. Every agency has a lane, and every lane has limits. The space people understood the object. The geologists understood the ground. The environmental people understood sampling. The transportation people understood freight and corridors. The military understood perimeter and special equipment. None of them owned the whole event. That meant coordination became its own emergency. I stepped outside around 3:30 because I needed to hear Sacramento without headphones for 1 minute. The air smelled burned. Even this far north, not heavy. Present. A few people stood near the building entrance checking phones, each one tilted away from the others. State workers, media staff, emergency planners, drivers, security. Nobody wanted to say too much. The city itself still had power. Traffic lights still worked. Restaurants that stayed open late had closed early. Gas stations had lines because fear moves faster than orders. I looked south from the parking area and could not see the impact, of course. I could only see the result moving through systems one alert at a time. At 4:15, we received the first credible lab flag, unofficial and not for public release. The University Materials Group had examined particles collected far outside the hot zone, from a vehicle air filter and roof surface in the Eastern Valley. The sample was mostly ordinary disaster filth at first glance: mineral dust, combustion residue, plant ash, road material, bits of insulation, metallic particles. Then the word structured appeared in a note. Structured fragments. Not proof of design, that is important. Natural crystals have structure. Industrial debris can have structure. Space objects can contain minerals that look strange to people outside that field. But the note said the geometry of some fragments did not match common fire debris, vehicle debris, or local soil dust. The second day began before sunrise with too many maps and not enough certainty. Impact, fire, smoke, evacuation, power, water, hospitals, freight, schools, shelters, agriculture, public order. Each map had a different truth. The fire map said one thing, the smoke model said another. The transportation map looked worse than the evacuation map. The hospital map looked stable until a single emergency department changed status and forced ambulances into longer routes. The water map had question marks where people wanted green dots. People outside emergency work expect one master map. We do not get one. We get layers, delays, contradictions, and phone calls from tired humans standing near the thing the map is trying to describe. At 6 in the morning, the public saw daylight images for the first time. Smoke hid the crater itself, but the surrounding damage was enough. Burn scars, downed lines. Damaged farm roads, a broken string of vehicles on Interstate 5 near the closure, emergency vehicles staged along safer roads. Fields coated in dust, the hills looked raw and wrong without needing any dramatic language. People who had slept through the first hours woke up and understood that yesterday had not been a bad fire with a space headline. Yesterday had punched a hole in the state's operating system. The phones surged again. Missing persons, road status, school closures, water safety, power restoration, insurance, livestock, medication, oxygen, fuel. The state ordered expanded air monitoring and asked counties to treat the dust as hazardous until proven otherwise. That was the right call. It made cleanup slower and people hated it, but it prevented a worse mistake. Ordinary wildfire ash already contains things people should not breathe. Burned vehicles and buildings add metals, plastics, chemicals, and insulation fibers. Impact material adds unknowns. If some of the object vaporized on impact and condensed into fine particles, then dust size matters. Fine particles enter lungs more easily. If metallic particles carry unusual chemistry, then soil and water testing matters. If the crater material remains hot in odd ways, then responders need distance until scientists explain why. The firefight improved after sunrise in some places and got worse in others. Aircraft found windows where smoke thinned. Ground crews cut and reinforced lines. Bulldozers moved where terrain allowed. Rural engines protected structures where they could. Some ranchers stayed too long because leaving animals behind is one of those choices people outside the rural world judge too easily. A sheriff's sergeant said over the coordination line that deputies had found 3 separate property owners trying to trailer horses through road closures. Nobody on that call laughed. Everyone understood. Then the sergeant said one trailer had jackknifed and blocked a lane needed for fire. Equipment. Understanding did not make the road wider. By 7:30, food distribution entered the official conversation. Central Valley packing and cold storage facilities wanted power priority. Trucking firms wanted clear staging areas. Grocery chains wanted to know whether loads from the valley should be rerouted, held, inspected, or dumped. The public hears California agriculture and thinks of farms as scenery. Emergency managers hear it and think of perishables, workers, irrigation schedules, cold rooms, diesel packaging, forklifts, route access, labor availability, and buyers waiting in other states. A strawberry field cannot wait politely because a highway is closed. Milk trucks need to move. Poultry houses need power. Cattle need water. Diesel deliveries matter as much as the headline. At 8 in the morning, I was handed a private summary that mentioned artificial isotopic ratios. Nobody wanted that phrase spoken publicly yet. I am going to explain why it mattered without pretending it meant aliens. Isotopes are versions of an element with different numbers of neutrons. Natural processes create certain ratios. Industrial processes can create different ratios. Nuclear activity can create others. Space material can be unusual because it formed under conditions not found here. So artificial isotopic ratios did not mean little green anything. It meant some fragment or particle in a sample did not fit the first natural explanation. It opened a list: old military satellite, foreign spacecraft debris, classified aerospace hardware, unknown industrial source, contamination from equipment, lab error, or a natural object with chemistry that needed better scientists than me. The pressure to simplify was instant. I could feel it through the statements being drafted. One side wanted to keep saying asteroid because asteroid was already public and did not imply human blame. Another side wanted identified object because the material findings were getting messy. Defense contacts were careful enough to be useless. Space agency contacts said the orbit reconstruction was ongoing. State officials cared less about what to call it than whether people were driving toward it. That is the split the public often misses. The naming fight can consume Washington while county crews still need barricades, water, masks, tow trucks, and radio batteries. At 9:15, a drone team outside the hot zone lost 2 aircraft in a row. The pilots were experienced and both flights were short. The first drone yawed hard, ignored correction, and went down in brush. The second showed compass and inertial errors before the operator cut the mission. Heat, smoke, magnetic interference, bad calibration, damaged software, and pilot stress all stayed on the table. Then, a National Guard unit reported trouble with a separate unmanned system closer to the restricted zone. That moved the issue from local glitch to operational hazard. The order changed fast. No unnecessary unmanned flights near the inner perimeter. Manned aircraft would maintain standoff unless cleared. Ground robots were discussed, then delayed because nobody trusted the control links near the center. At 10, public anger shifted from fear to blame. People wanted to know why nobody stopped it, why there was no warning, why Interstate 5 was still closed, why shelters were crowded, why masks were not everywhere, why water guidance differed by county, why the federal government would not say what hit, why state officials were asking people not to collect fragments if fragments were harmless, and why helicopters were flying over some towns but not rescuing every stranded person on camera. Some questions were fair, some had no fair answer. Some came from people who had never seen the inside of a response center and believed every resource was waiting in a warehouse until a politician allowed it out. I said on the live update that nobody should expect California to clear Interstate 5 the way it clears a normal crash. That route had possible pavement damage, debris, disabled vehicles, fire exposure, power line hazards, law enforcement closure points, and unknown contamination. Opening it too soon would create a second wave of stranded drivers and possibly expose thousands to dust nobody had characterized. Highway 99 could take some movement, but it was already stressed. Bay Area crossings and Pacheco Pass routes had their own limits. Southern routes through Tehachapi and the Grapevine were not magic either. In this state, all roads look connected on a map. In a disaster, each grade, bridge, tunnel, interchange, and county line becomes a decision point. At 10:42, my daughter texted that her crew had been reassigned to a medical staging area near Merced, then pulled back because air quality readings were getting worse. She wrote, "Tell people not to bring dusty clothes into shelters if they can avoid it. Bag it outside." That was good practical advice, and we used it. Remove outer layers if heavily contaminated. Do not shake clothing indoors. Keep dust out of sleeping areas. Wash hands and face with clean water. If water service is under advisory, follow local instructions. Keep inhalers closed. Check on neighbors who use powered medical devices. Do not run generators indoors in garages or near windows. Every disaster creates carbon monoxide calls because people get scared, improvise, and forget that invisible exhaust can kill quietly. By noon, the national supply story was no longer theoretical. Rail operators were assessing routes and yards. Warehouses across the Inland Empire wanted to know whether inbound loads from Northern California would be delayed. Fuel distributors were checking alternate deliveries. Airlines were watching ash and smoke for routing impacts, even where airports stayed open. The Port of Oakland had questions about truck flow. The Los Angeles and Long Beach port complex had questions about downstream freight because California cargo does not stay in California. A container, a pallet of produce, a medical shipment, a replacement transformer, a truckload of bottled water, and a refrigerated trailer all compete for route space when the map shrinks. The crater remained out of direct public view, which made the internet worse. If officials do not show the center, people assume a cover-up. Sometimes that is fair skepticism. Sometimes the center is hidden because smoke, heat, and terrain make imagery poor, and because releasing blurry pictures creates 10 million confident idiots by dinner. The internal imagery we heard described was not clean either. A depressed impact area, radiating ground disturbance, patches of high heat, metallic reflection in spots, broken and ejected material, fire damage around it, no tidy object sitting there for a camera, no hatch, no bodies, no science fiction display. Just a dangerous scar in remote California terrain and data that refused to settle down. At 1:15, the first responder injury report from the restricted area changed the mood. A hazmat team member outside the inner zone had experienced dizziness and a skin-burning sensation after contact with fine dust on a glove cuff during sample packaging. That could have been chemical irritation, heat stress, dehydration, or ordinary contamination exposure. The team followed decontamination procedures and the responder was stable. Still, it hardened the rules. More distance, better protective equipment, slower sampling. People at home hear slower and think incompetence. In hazardous material work, slower is often the reason the incident does not get bigger. At 2 in the afternoon, the water politics became blunt. Southern California agencies wanted reassurance that imported supplies would remain reliable. Central Valley agricultural districts wanted testing priority. Environmental regulators wanted sampling before any flushing or disposal. Local officials wanted bottled water for communities under advisory. Tribal governments wanted direct lines instead of being routed through county. Systems that had already failed them in past disasters. Small systems wanted generators. Larger systems wanted laboratory capacity. Everybody wanted certainty from water that had not been tested yet. The hard answer was this. If the dust entered a canal reservoir edge, open storage, or damaged distribution system, nobody should predict a visual inspection was enough. At 3, I watched a state transportation official lose patience in a coordination call. He said in plain language that no governor could order a damaged corridor open by wanting it open. Crews needed to inspect pavement, bridges, slopes, signs, guardrails, and power hazards. Tow operators needed access. Fire crews needed to finish suppression near the road. Law enforcement needed to keep civilians out. Environmental teams needed to decide whether debris along the shoulders required controlled removal. That speech should have been public. People needed to hear it, not to excuse delay, but to understand that a highway is a physical thing, not a line on a press release. At 3:40, the Federal Science Group changed the object description again. Probable, non-cometary, non-AC body, significant metallic component. Fragmentation uncertain. Pre-impact track under review. Some recovered particles inconsistent with local terrestrial contamination. That was the official safe version. The private notes were sharper. Some fragments showed layered microstructure. Some ratios did not fit common meteorite classes from the first pass. The material retained heat longer than expected for particle size and collection location. Instruments near the crater showed magnetic instability. None of that proved intent. It proved only that the event had moved beyond ordinary bolide damage. That alone was enough to shift the disaster into a national security lane. Around 4 in the afternoon, exactly one day after the impact, the president approved a major disaster declaration request process and federal assets began moving in more visibly. I am keeping the politics out because politics were not useful inside those first hours. The useful things were aircraft, mobile communications, generators, medical teams, hazardous materials support, transport coordination, debris expertise, and money authority. Emergency declarations do not fix the road. They open doors for help, reimbursement, and command structure. The practical effect came through fast. More federal liaisons in the room, more guarded language in statements, and a harder perimeter around the impact zone. The second public evening began with a mistake from an official who said the situation was stabilizing. That word was technically defensible in one lane and wrong in the larger sense. Fire spread had slowed in some sectors. Good. Shelter operations were functioning. Good. Some hospital transfers had balanced out. Good. But the crater science was not stable. The water testing was not complete. Interstate 5 was not restored. Dust advisories were expanding, and public trust was thinning. Stabilizing can make regular people think the worst is past. In disasters, one category can stabilize while 3 others are getting worse. I corrected it on air without making a fight. I said some response operations were improving, but the event remained active and dangerous. At 5:10, a group of independent researchers from a Bay Area lab posted a cautious thread saying they had detected unusual metallic particles in dust samples collected well outside the closure zone. They did not claim origin. They did not use the word alien. They asked for chain of custody discipline and warned people not to collect samples without protection. That was responsible, and it still lit the public on fire because people are trained to read mystery as proof. Within 20 minutes, fake accounts were selling crater dust. Within 30, people were offering cash for fragments. By 6, law enforcement had already stopped vehicles carrying shovels, magnets, and coolers toward rural roads near the perimeter. Humans are exhausting in the most predictable ways. At 6:30, the state asked media outlets to repeat a simple warning. Do not collect, buy, sell, mail, grind, wash, heat, or display suspected impact material. That list sounded ridiculous until you understand why each word was there. People collect debris. People sell debris. People mail samples to friends. People grind material to see what is inside. People heat rocks because the internet told them to test something. People put strange objects on kitchen counters. If the material is toxic, reactive, radioactive, biologically contaminated, or simply sharp and full of heavy metals, those behaviors create exposures far from the crater. Disaster debris can travel through stupidity faster than trucks. My daughter checked in again at 7. Her crew was safe, tired, short on clean masks. She said some evacuees were showing up with dust inside cars because they had driven through bad air with vents open for hours. A few had eye injuries from rubbing grit into the surface. Several older patients had breathing trouble after waiting in traffic. One man had tried to walk around a closure to reach his brother's property and came back coughing hard enough to be transported. She did not ask what the object was. That stayed with me. People doing field work often do not care about the mystery until the mystery changes. Treatment, route, or protective gear. She cared about masks, roads, oxygen, and whether shelters had enough chairs for people who could not stand in line. At 8, we got a power update that explained why some neighborhoods far from the strike were still dark. The grid problem was not one broken line. It was damaged transmission, protective trips, fire risk shutoffs, substation checks, smoke impacts, crew access, and demand management during heat and poor air. California's grid is already a balancing act in hot weather. Add smoke-reducing solar output, dust coating panels, damaged lines, sudden evacuation loads, generators, emergency facilities needing priority, and public fear, and you get outages that make perfect sense to operators and no sense to a family staring at a dead refrigerator. We told people to treat downed lines as live, keep generators outside, and check local cooling centers before driving. At 9, a law enforcement commander reported that several small communities near the outer closure were asking for more deputies because outsiders were trying to enter at night. Some were looking for relatives. Some were trying to loot empty properties. Some wanted debris. Some were just lost. Night operations in rural California are dangerous even without impact dust. Roads narrow, cattle get loose, smoke kills visibility. Fire equipment moves without warning. Power poles may be down. A driver who misses a turn can end up blocking a dirt road needed for a water tender. That is why closure violations are not harmless. One selfish vehicle can cost an entire crew 10 minutes when 10 minutes matters. At 10:15, the first hard national security sentence reached us, still not public. The object might not be naturally occurring in whole or in part. That is a careful sentence, and every word carries weight. Might not be naturally occurring, in whole or in part. It left room for contamination. A natural asteroid carrying human-made debris from an old collision. A spacecraft fragment misidentified as an asteroid, a deliberate object, or something nobody had modeled. I did not repeat it. I am repeating it now because this is the record of how those first 48 hours felt. Inside the information stream. At the time, saying it publicly without proof would have caused more harm than clarity. The second night was the hardest stretch because fatigue started making smart people dumb. You could hear it in the calls. People repeating old numbers, people mixing counties, people saying west when they meant east, people reading shelter names from outdated lists. One wrong shelter address can send a family into traffic for nothing. One wrong road status can put a convoy against a closure. We began using a slower update rhythm, forcing confirmation before repeating changes. That frustrates viewers because silence feels suspicious. But a bad update spoken fast is worse than a good update spoken late. Emergency information has to be boringly accurate or it becomes another hazard. After midnight on the second night, the crater heat issue got worse on paper. Thermal readings still showed persistent hot zones not explained by surface fire alone. Scientists argued about buried molten material, metal-rich deposits, chemical reactions, instrument error, and heat trapped under ejecta. Hazmat commanders cared about one thing. It was not safe to walk in. That meant no close human inspection, no easy sample retrieval, no quick answer. The public wanted a picture and a label. The field teams wanted not to die or contaminate themselves for a headline. I sided with the field teams. At 1:20 in the morning, a hospital in the valley requested guidance for possible dust exposure patients who had no burns, no trauma, but strange metallic taste, dizziness, irritated eyes, and skin redness. None of that was proof of exotic contamination. Wildfire smoke, stress, dehydration, cleaning chemicals, anxiety, and ordinary dust exposure can do plenty. Still, poison control and public health began building a reporting category so cases could be tracked. That is how real science begins in a disaster, not with a dramatic answer but with a form. Who was exposed, where, how long, what symptoms, what protective gear, what sample area, what medical history. Boring questions save lives. At 2:30, the agriculture line became personal for people who had never stepped into a field. News desks in other states started calling about produce safety. Could lettuce from California be contaminated? Could almonds carry dust? What about milk, beef, poultry, tomatoes, grapes? Those questions were fair but too broad. California is huge. The affected zone was not the entire state. Food safety depends on location, exposure, harvest timing, washing, processing, inspection, and distribution. Panic dumping safe food would make shortages worse. Ignoring contamination near the plume would be reckless. So the answer was narrow. Follow county and state agricultural holds. Test exposed crops in affected zones, protect workers, and do not turn one critter into a fake map of poisoned California. At 3:45, an engineer from a water district said something that stuck with me because it was plain and true. He said, "We can move water around a lot of problems, but we cannot move trust around bad data." That was exactly it. If people believe the water is unsafe, the system suffers even if the water tests clean. If officials say water is safe too early and get it wrong, trust breaks for years. California water already carries old fights between north and south, farms and cities, fish and pumps, groundwater and canals, rich districts and poor ones. The impact dropped unknown material into a state where water is never just water. It is survival, politics, money, and memory. At 4:30, the federal perimeter changed again. More guarded access, more military logistics, more scientific equipment staged at distance. That fed the cover-up claims, and I understand why. A larger perimeter does look suspicious. But it also meant instruments were failing near the center. Dust behavior was not understood, and samples were returning enough red flags to justify caution. The cleanest explanation was still possible. A metal-heavy object hit, burned, scattered hazardous material, and confused instruments because of magnetic debris and heat. That explanation did not cover every report neatly, but real disasters almost never cover every report neatly. Some reports are wrong, some are duplicates, some are early clues. Sorting them takes time. At 5:15, I finally saw a private still image clear enough to make the room go quiet. It showed part of the outer crater field from an aircraft at standoff distance. Most of it was smoke, ash, burned ground, and broken earth. Near one edge, where the soil had been thrown back, there were angular fragments with surfaces too regular for comfort. Not a machine sitting intact. Not a door. Not anything a movie would give you. Just pieces. Flat planes, repeating layers, a faint dark sheen, and scorched ground around them. I am being careful because images can lie, angles can trick, and damaged material can appear regular. But several experienced people in that room looked at the same image and stopped talking. The official line at sunrise, 40 hours after impact, stayed controlled. Unknown object originally assessed as asteroid. Ongoing analysis, hazardous debris, avoid the area. Fire containment improving in some sectors, air quality unhealthy across affected counties. Water advisories remain local and specific. Major transportation disruptions continue. Federal and state response expanded. No evidence of additional inbound objects. That was the line. It was true. It was also shaped to avoid the one question everyone now had. If it was not fully natural, what had hit California? The people writing the line did not know. That is harder to accept than secrecy. Sometimes the state is not hiding the answer. Sometimes the answer does not exist yet. At 7 in the morning, regular life tried to restart and failed in uneven ways. People in Sacramento went to work with masks in glove compartments. Bay Area commuters checked maps and wondered whether to cancel trips inland. Parents in Fresno refreshed school closure pages. Farm crews waited in parking lots for supervisors. Truckers slept in cabs near staging areas. Nurses finished shifts and found highways changed behind them. Hotel lobbies filled with evacuees arguing over chargers, pets, prescriptions, and whether the smoke smell in the hallway meant they should leave again. Disaster does not stop normal need. It stacks on top of it until normal tasks become negotiations. At 8, I gave the clearest public explanation I could about why California's infrastructure could not simply absorb the hit. The state depends on long corridors. Water moves long distances. Food moves long distances. Electricity crosses fire-prone terrain. Freight enters through ports and moves inland on highways and rail. Hospitals rely on staffing, fuel supplies, oxygen, clean water, and working roads. Wildfire response relies on access and aircraft. Evacuation relies on roads built for daily traffic. Not every frightened person in 3 counties leaving at once. An impact in the wrong rural place can damage the connectors, and connectors are what make California function. At 9, a county official made the first request for federal support with debris security in plain public language. That was new, not just hazardous debris security. The reason given was public safety and preservation of evidence. Evidence was the word. It moved the event again. A natural disaster has debris. A criminal event has evidence. A national security event has material. This now had all 3. You could feel broadcasters across the country trying to decide which word to use. I stayed with impact material because it was the least wrong. I told people the reason did not matter for their behavior. Do not touch it. Do not move it. Do not buy it. Report it and back away. My daughter's staging area received patients from a small roadside exposure cluster. A family had tried to cut around closures using a farm road because the father believed online posts saying the road was open. Their car got a flat, they walked through dust, and 2 children started coughing. They were not dying. They were scared, dirty, and angry. That is how misinformation hurts people most of the time, not through grand conspiracies. Through one father choosing a bad road because a stranger with a confident map told him it would save time. I repeat it again. Do not use unofficial route posts. Do not trust screenshots. Use county alerts, state transportation updates, and law enforcement instructions on the ground. At 11:15, we learned that some dust particles were collecting around metal fences. Parked vehicles, power equipment, and standing water and patterns field observers did not want to call normal. That report was not ready for public use, but it matched several earlier observations. Dust around electrical fields, dust in air filters, dust clinging hard to solar panels, dust forming thin skins along irrigation ditches and puddles. There are ordinary explanations for parts of that. Static charge, moisture, particle size, wind eddies, surface texture, burn chemistry. But the pattern kept appearing in reports from people who did not know what others had reported. That is when a pattern becomes difficult to ignore. By noon on the second day, Washington had moved from support to control. You could hear it in the way calls were scheduled, in who got added, and in which words disappeared from draft statements. State officials still ran life safety operations. Counties still carried evacuations, shelters, and local alerts. But the crater itself was no longer just a California incident. The Department of Defense had aircraft restrictions. Federal law enforcement had evidence concerns. Scientific teams were being filtered through clearance and safety review. The Environmental Protection Agency and state environmental teams had sampling lanes. The Space Agency had trajectory reconstruction. The public got one sentence. Analysis continues. At 1 in the afternoon, a reporter from back east asked me whether California was being quarantined. I told him no, and I meant it. Words matter. Quarantine is for disease control or contamination control in specific legal contexts. What we had were road closures, hazardous material exclusion zones, air advisories, local water warnings, fire evacuations, and federal restrictions around an impact site. That is already serious. Calling it quarantine would make people imagine border guards in sealed cities. There was no statewide lockdown. There were targeted controls around real hazards. The truth was bad enough without inflating it into nonsense. At 2, the second wave of shelter problems hit. Medication shortages among evacuees, pets, people with mobility needs, language access, family separation, phone batteries, anxiety attacks, people who had left home with no identification because the order came fast, people who refused to register because they feared immigration consequences or insurance consequences or law enforcement. Disaster shelters are not just cots. They are temporary towns full of every problem the real town had, plus smoke, fear, and bad sleep. Volunteers were doing good work, but volunteers cannot replace a functioning housing system, medical system, transportation system, and clean air all at once. At 3:10, a field science team got its first successful controlled sample from beyond the inner crater, using remote collection under strict distance rules. The update was short, sample secured, chain of custody maintained, no immediate release. That tiny success mattered. It meant the event was moving from rumor and scattered dust into evidence. Real testing takes time. People hate that. They want a scanner to say natural or artificial, safe or deadly, enemy or accident. Real laboratories do not work that way under smoke, contamination, and legal scrutiny. Samples must be labeled, protected, transported, split, compared and checked against contamination from the tools, suits, containers, vehicles, and collection environment. At 4, exactly 48 hours approached, and the state was not ending the emergency. It was entering the next phase. Fires still burned, though some lines were holding. Interstate 5 remained restricted near the damaged corridor. Highway 99 carried too much diverted traffic. Schools stayed closed across affected counties. Several water systems remained under advisory. Hospitals were tired but functioning under strain. Agricultural holds and testing zones were expanding. Air quality stayed bad. Power crews were restoring service in pieces. The crater remained sealed. The object remained unidentified in any honest sense. That was the truth at 48 hours. California had survived the hit, but it had not absorbed it. I want to be careful with what I say next because this is where people twist words. I do not know what hit us. I know what did not fit. The detection was late. The track came over the Pacific and ended inland. The impact carried enough signs of a small cosmic event for the first response to make sense. The fires, blast damage, road failures, smoke, injuries, water worries, and power problems were all real and ordinary in the brutal way disasters are ordinary. Then the material refused to stay ordinary. Instruments failed near the crater in patterns. Compasses drifted. Drones lost control. Samples showed structured fragments and isotope questions. Dust gathered around metal, electrical equipment, and water in ways still under review. That does not prove a story. It proves the old story is incomplete. There were people inside government who wanted to say military satellite. There were people who wanted foreign object. There were people who wanted rare asteroid composition. There were people who wanted classified aerospace accident. There were people who wanted no label at all until the lab's finished. I thought about all of those and kept coming back to the same rule I have used for years covering fires, floods, and public health emergencies. If a theory does not change what people should do in the next hour, do not let the theory bury the instruction. Stay out of the zone. Keep dust out of lungs, follow water advisories, keep roads open for crews, help neighbors who cannot drive or breathe well. Do not touch debris. Do not turn uncertainty into entertainment. At 4:17 in the afternoon on the second day, the exact hour of the impact passed without ceremony in the room. No one stopped, no one gave a speech. A transportation planner was arguing about lane access for fuel trucks. A public health doctor was asking for better symptom reporting. A water official was pushing for more lab capacity. A fire coordinator was checking overnight wind. A federal liaison was standing behind a phone with his hand over one ear. That is how 48 hours ended. Not with an answer, with work. With tired people trying to keep a damaged state from turning one disaster into 5. The last update I gave before stepping away from the desk was simple because simple was all I trusted. California is under a major emergency. The impact area remains dangerous. Fire smoke, road closures, power outages, shelter crowding, hospital strain, and water concerns are still active. The material from the object is being treated as hazardous and evidence. Do not go looking for it. If you are in an affected county, protect your breathing, keep dust outside, check official local water guidance, and stay off evacuation routes unless you are ordered to move. If you are outside California, do not assume this is only a California story. Food, freight, fuel, ports, water decisions, medical supply chain, and national security are now attached to this crater. I heard from my daughter again after that. She was sitting in the back of an ambulance with the doors open just enough for air, boots dusty, hands raw from sanitizer, voice almost gone. She said she had never seen so many people do the wrong thing for understandable reasons. I knew what she meant. Parents drove into smoke because children were on the other side. Ranchers crossed closures because animals were trapped. Drivers followed bad maps because official information lagged. Reporters pushed for pictures because pictures prove scale. Officials held back words because words can start panic. Nobody inside those 48 hours got to be perfectly right. The goal was to be useful enough to keep people alive. So this is what happened during the first 48 hours after the object hit. California, a late detected body came in over the Pacific and struck inland west of the San Joaquin Valley. The first damage was understandable. Blast effects, fires, broken roads, power failures, smoke, hospital surge, water risk, shelter strain, and traffic collapse. Then the evidence changed, not all at once, not in a clean reveal. A failed drone here, a compass there, a sample note, a heat reading. A dust pattern, a fragment with structure, an isotope question. Enough pieces that serious people stopped calling it ordinary, but not enough to say what it was. That is the honest place to end the first account, not with certainty, with a sealed crater, a damaged state, and a country waiting for the next briefing.